Thanks everyone for coming. I'm Joseph Thebus, and this is Frater Puck. And we'll be talking today about the principles of podcast promulgation. What we've done is we've put together a little outline of different topics that we want to talk about, and we haven't really conferred much about what we're going to say.
We're winging it.
Yeah. So we're going to speak rather extemporaneously along the outline and kind of take turns. So it is, as I say, going to be extemporaneous, so feel free to jump in if you have any questions or comments. So do you want to...
Short. Shall I start?
Sure.
Okay. I'm known as Frater Puck, but I'm also Peter Seals. I've been in the order for 17 years. As far as promulgation, I guess experience would be being a body master and making outreach attempts with different open classes, lectures, events, that type of thing. Experience with podcasts, prior to this, zero. I knew there were things called podcasts, but just kind of jumped in with both feet when I had the opportunity, thanks to the Public Information Officer tapping.
My name is Joseph Thebus. I've been in the OTO since 1999, so 12 years. Prior to that, I was in Freemasonry and Demolay and had a study group back home. I grew up in Montana, and so this has been a lifelong pursuit of mine in terms of the OTO work. I've been interested in Aleister Crowley and Thelema since I was about 16. My interest in promulgation comes from the fact that I grew up in an area where there was no Thelemic culture or OTO or anything like that, and I spent a long time looking for OTO before I ever found it, or knew really if it was the real OTO for that matter. And so that's kind of where my motivation comes from. As far as podcasting experience, like Frater Puck, I had none prior to starting this one. The Speech and the Silence is the podcast I work on, and it was just a passion for wanting to get the information out there, as well as a willingness to learn some technology to make that happen. So I guess that's all about me. Do you want to go into talking about the individual podcasts? And
well, I'd actually like for us to, when we did our little abstract, we quoted from Duty in regards to promulgation. If you missed John Hanley's previous, just right before us, talking about occulture and how promulgation gets sometimes seen as a dirty word, this is how we started our abstract. You want to?
Sure. This is a quote from Duty. You may regard the establishment of the Law of Thelema as an essential element of your true will, since whatever the ultimate nature of that will, the evident condition of putting it into execution is freedom from external interference. So establishing the Law of Thelema makes society more free, and if society is more free, then we can each individually be more free.
And, there's some miscommunications perhaps when people think of promulgation versus proselytizing and definitions of different things. But I think we both, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, aren't trying to force anything on anybody, but we are forcing the information out there to be found. And there's different approaches, and I'm actually a fan of all approaches because I think there's so many different types of people that the direct approach works. The insidious approach works. I liked your word from your presentation. I'm big on insidious. A smiley, happy, good insidious, but insidious, because I thought you were going to actually call it a Flintstones vitamin, because that's actually the metaphor, Yeah. It's a vitamin, but it's candy. I'll have my vitamin. But, not everybody requires that Flintstones vitamin, but I'm more than happy to provide those too.
Yeah, that's good. I think we have like a section a little bit later where we're going to talk about promulgation specifically, but I think this is good to kind of address maybe some of the controversy about promulgation at the outset, that promulgation is not forcing Thelema down people's throats or
that would be unthelemic.
Or converting them, or even it's not even really about arguing with people about whether they should buy into our ideas, but rather putting the information out there, open declaration of Thelema, so that people can tune into it, turn on, and get out.
Right.
Yes. The Summer Agape just printed a whole article on this very topic.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, and that just came out. So if you haven't gotten it in your mailboxes, it should be there when you get home. Frater Enatheleme 131. put that article together. In fact, maybe that's a good segue to go into talking a little bit about the podcasts. And
Oh, sure.
So Speech in the Silence is, I'm not alone in putting together Speech in the Silence. Frater Enatheleme 131 has been integrally related with that since the very beginning. Basically, it got started when he and I were talking about our mutual interest in promulgating the law and in putting information out there, and our interest in promoting the work that's being done all over the place at local bodies. Members of local bodies are putting together talks and delivering them in their local areas, and that kind of tends to get lost over time, and we wanted to kind of both create something that would archive that, as well as creating some media that people could tune into if they didn't have a local body anywhere near them. So he and I had already kind of been thinking about podcast in the back of my head, and I said, well, what do you think about a podcast? And he said, well, I'll do all this stuff that you don't want to do if you do the stuff you want to do. And so we made it happen that way. And very shortly after he and I got started, we recruited Ashley Sweet, who is the narrator, announcer voice on there, and David Shoemaker, we actually was one of the people we approached about doing some content, and he said, well, what about if I did content every month? And we were like, great, less work for us. but that turned out to be Living Thelema segment, which has been a great hit. So that's kind of how Speech in the Silence got started. The kind of mission of our podcast is we have a very close focus on Aleister Crowley, OTO, and magick, yoga, and initiations, kind of looking at lectures, interviews, couple interviews we've done, but mainly lectures, discussions, readings, and we also have some music. So the idea is to spread awareness of both Thelema, Aleister Crowley, and OTO, and to create a creative outlet for initiates, so that, as I mentioned, people doing talks at their local valleys or doing music can include that in the podcast.
And I'm the host of Thelema Now, which I don't do by myself either. Two people in this room actually helped make it happen. That they're acting like they don't know who I'm talking about. Howard and Amy. Howard is the Public Information Officer of Grand Lodge, and he mentioned that the idea of a podcast to provide interviews of general interest to people interested in Thelema. And I'll actually read the mission statement. Oh, and Amy makes me sound coherent, which I could use right now, actually. But I can't get you to edit me right now. Our mission is to provide listeners with interesting, informative, thought-provoking interviews featuring individuals involved in myriad realms of mysticism, spirituality, and magical theory and practice, authors, sorcerers, academics, entertainers. And this is where, hopefully you guys back there won't contradict me, but I think insidious is our approach. We're being insidious because I want someone to get led to the OTO from something they like and go, this Frater Puck guy's talking to him about certain things that resonate with me. What is this Thelema? So we're trying to cast a wider net. And it's interesting that we're paired up, and I had wanted to approach you about it because there's kind of a wide net approach and a focused approach, which I think work together in an interesting thing. Though, that doesn't mean that it should only be two podcasts. You know, if everybody in here started embracing this technology, which I think we're going to touch on about the way technology can allow this promulgation to happen from many different facets is what's exciting. And the theme of this NOTOCON, you know, technology is something that we all can use in various ways. We don't have to run podcasts, but who knows what you can do, you know, if you embrace this stuff. And we've had a range of different types of guests, from Thelemic authors to authors that are just involved in Hermeticism or Goetic work, whatever, to musicians, to very established OTO figures, to someone who would probably fight with me if I called them a Thelemite. But if you notice, again, I'm insidious when I'm interviewing them. I purposely keep trying to position what they're doing the way I want it to sound, which is that they're individuals that don't, pardon my language, don't give a shit about what the rest of the world thinks about what they do. which to me is Thelema. They're just doing their will. And I'm not going to ruin the interview by saying, well, you have to say you're a Thelemite. I'm going to say, well, I think our listeners would be very interested to hear more about how, even though nobody was interested in what you were doing, you did it anyway. And now this has happened. So we're trying to make it an inspiring, invigorating, if people are listening because they like that artist or whoever they are, or they're interested in Thelema but they don't know how, maybe they're scared off, and then they have something that's insidiously pleasant and inviting and interesting, can lure them to consider these things. Again, not forcing anything, but I'm trying to cause trouble. So that's pretty much it.
So I guess maybe comparing and contrasting
Sure.
is kind of interesting. I guess both of the podcasts started right about the same time, didn't they? Like
Yeah.
within a month or so of each other.
Yep.
And we were both working on it independently, and it just so happened that we were ready at the same time. So it's really interesting, though, but because we were working on it independently, we've both ended up taking very different approaches to the way we've organized it, the programming and everything. And at first, like when we both came out, we were like, so what are you doing? What are we doing here? And so through the process of conversation and then hearing each other's podcasts, I think it became clear what the differences and similarities were, and that we were both interested in spreading Thelema. We were taking very different approaches, and like we have different target audiences. For example,
Sure.
Speech in the Silence is very much focused toward people who are interested specifically in Thelema already, or who are Thelemites, or who are order members as the target audience. Whereas I think Thelema now is more of a broad.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if an OTO member would be interested in a portion of our interviews more than all of them. Mm-hmm. But we're casting a wide net for Grand Lodge. It's a Grand Lodge thing. So trying to lure people to that page, trying to lure people to the idea that there is an OTO. But again, as an order member who is a Thelemite, I was happy to participate with your podcast and be on your podcast.
Yeah.
So, I think they're two great tastes that go great together.
Yeah,
It
definitely.
kind of works.
Definitely, and you touched on and mentioned the Grand Lodge involvement too. That's another kind of difference, is that your podcast is kind of developed under the auspices of Grand Lodge, and so there's been a lot of input, I imagine, from officers of Grand Lodge. And whereas our podcast was very autocratic, and like we were doing it whether anybody cared or wanted to put their stamp of approval on it or not, and so that's a kind of another way that they've developed that's been different. And so I guess by drawing attention to the differences and the similarities, I want to bring up the point that there's lots of room between those two extremes or other extremes for other kinds of Thelemic podcasts, I think. I heard of some folks who were thinking about putting together another one that's going to be focused on EGC-related topics.
Nice.
And so I think that there could be one that was all music, for example.
That'd be great,
or that kind of thing. So one thing I wanted to bring up in relation to the question of promulgation and how the idea of there's sort of the idea of declaring Thelema openly, publishing Thelema specifically, and then talking about or presenting yourself as an exemplary Thelemite, or doing Thelemic work without necessarily saying this is Thelemic. The kind of the insidious approach that John was talking about in his talk. I think that there's an interesting, I think it's kind of a spectrum, but I think it's also that there are almost two different things, in the sense that that establishing or presenting arguments for Thelema is something that we don't do, right? In the Book of the Law, it says, argue not, convert not, talk not over much. So we don't go out there and say, well, this is why you should be a Thelemite. Instead, we exemplify ourselves as Thelemites, and then those who see something in us that they identify with, or that they like, or that they wonder about, then become attracted to the idea of Thelema. So it seems like that's kind of the spectrum, is this idea of open declaration and exemplifying. And I think that the Crowley uses the language of promulgating and establishing. And I almost think of of the exemplifying as being the establishing or showing how it is established, and through showing rather than telling, then we provide. That's what we do instead of arguing almost.
Right.
So I think it's kind of an interesting. I think both are actually necessary. Like if you only exemplify Thelema, then nobody knows what you're exemplifying.
Right.
If you only talk about Thelema, then nobody knows how that ends up resulting in one's daily life. So that's kind of an interesting way of thinking about those things, I think. So why do you think it's important to do promulgation through podcasting or the internet in general?
Is that what?
It's one thing.
You know what? I agree that we go there because it seems obvious that why bother doing this? It's the exercise of it that's the point. It's its own point. Even if nobody listened. Both of these podcasts have listeners. They're very successful. They're growing quite a bit, and that's a remarkably heartening thing. But I think we would still be doing it. I don't know about Grand Lodge. They might pull the plug on it, but nobody listened to it. But not everything I've ever done in terms of promulgation, I can say, look, I got this many Minervals and whatever. I can only say that, why using this technology? First of all, it's easy to use. It actually is remarkably easy to use. And you can have decent quality. And there's no, like we were saying, how we can't really sue each other because we don't have any money, besides not being able to, being order members. We don't have money for podcasts, not really. So the fact that you can pretty much do this with very little money is a very effective guerrilla way to give a very professional product that can influence people. And this is kind of like that, because when you combine that with social networking, word of mouth, all those things, but when you add that electronic element to it in the internet, and here's a link to a podcast, check it out, all of a sudden it can go anywhere. I'm just going to say this. The reason why I think this is really important is that there was a study recently about when an idea tips. Do you know the one? It needs to be. It could be a very small minority, but it needs to be at least 10% before it really tips and turns into something and grows beyond what anyone expects. Well, I don't think we're at 10%, but if we harness the tools available to us, we can get there. We can approach that 10%. It seems almost necessary that we do podcasts and do whatever other things come along to promulgate in every way that we can. And getting people to do a music podcast or do a whatever podcast so that as we influence other people and they go, hey, you don't have one like this? No, do it. Because this technology we can all use. That's why we need to do it.
Yeah. Good point. And I think you touched on a really important thing, too, that we're not really focused on how many Minervals are we going to get. It's not really about recruitment, and it's not even really about making people Thelemites. I'm sure that we can probably both point to maybe one or two Minervals that we know have actually come to OTO because of our podcasts, but that's not kind of the focus. The main thing is getting the information out there, and thereby those people who might be interested might hear about it at some point.
Right.
And even if they're not that interested, maybe they're not ever going to be Thelemites, but then they know about Thelema, and they can have intelligent conversations about it, even if they aren't one themselves, and that just kind of furthers the spreading of information.
Exactly. Yeah, even in a weird way, this is specific to New York. I wish, we could have like a representative in other cities where they're involved in something cultural or something where ideas are more freely explored, like an art situation or a music situation. But in New York, because I live there, I do other promulgating things there that involve musicians or involve artists or whatever, and I've given lectures. And I've had people after those things say, oh, I heard you on your podcast. And there's this vortex that happens between, somebody's doing this thing in Brooklyn. Do you want to talk there? Because they heard about your podcast, and they heard from somebody else about that other thing you did, and it all becomes this thing. So if people react to the podcast and are locally doing things, that's that Uranian thing again. It's just like going everywhere.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Just to further exemplify what both of you were saying, the web hosting that we do for the podcast with Thelema now is very inexpensive. It's about $15 a month. So part of what you get is statistics on where the program is being downloaded. And I can't speak for speech and styles, but Thelema now is being downloaded in China, in Iran, in South America, in Russia, and we can see the countries where they're going. So it's not a lot. It's not a lot of people that
Sure.
are on.
But one person in China is pretty amazing, because how would we ever find them in the first place?
So this is really sort of just throwing the seeds
Yeah.
of Thelema out there. Instead of just keeping it very confined, you're really throwing it out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you probably have more than one in China too, probably because we've at least seen that like 30 to 50 every month, religiously. There's like 30 to 50 from China, which is
amazing, yeah.
mind blowing. But yeah, it's amazing to see how far these things can travel. And yeah, we use the same host that you guys do, Libsyn, and yeah, the statistics are great for that.
It really makes sense if you decide to do your own podcast, when you see the statistics on Libsyn, like where it's going and who's downloading it. It really, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, and you can look at that, and it really renews your energy to keep going.
Sure.
Definitely.
Well, I was just going to say that I think it's a perfect avenue because technology continues to even come out with different types of devices so they can, be able to listen to these type of things. And it's a perfect avenue that you both are doing because that's how it could reach someplace like China.
Sure.
And I think it's a perfect opportunity to, bring that much more out there. People that would not know what Thelema is, or don't have a local body, or don't even know what a local body is, can in some way make a local body, decide to come up and make a generation of new people that is interested in this, and it's a perfect way. It's a great avenue.
Yeah, some of the notes I had about how the podcast work can kind of impact the establishment of Thelema, just from the feedback I've gotten through either statistics or people talking to me about the podcast. I've noticed that it's had a big impact on isolated Thelemites, people who are out in the middle of nowhere, whether it's a different country or even the United States. There's plenty of areas that there's no OTO anywhere, and people who maybe are near OTO but don't know anybody, don't know how to get in contact, didn't think to use the Google for whatever reason, and just they find us first. And also people who are connected to Thelemic culture, who are OTO members, hearing the podcast has given them ideas, and they've heard about other people in other areas through them, and so people who are already connected become more connected. And I think also, a few years down the road here, we're going to start looking at these podcasts as a historical archive of what was happening during this time in the development of Thelema. And that's something that will, increase over time as well. One thing that I heard about recently is somebody told me that they found some, there's all these occult forums all over the internet, and they found one where there was a lot of focus on archiving PDF files and stuff like that. You hear about that sometimes. And he said that he noticed, he got on there, he was looking around, and he noticed that as soon as an episode of Speech in the Silence or Thelema Now came out, like that day, sometimes even that hour, they had mirrored it.
You're right.
They downloaded it and uploaded it to their own site. So there's like people archiving these things outside of our control, which is fantastic.
Right.
Yeah. And just as an anecdotal bit, I recently was in the Bay Area and met someone there who came to a class, and just having a casual conversation with the person, said, so where are you from? Saskatchewan, which is in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It's like, in the middle of the country.
There's the Canadian version of Nebraska.
Right, exactly, right.
Except much bigger.
Right, yeah. And she had some seasonal work, so she had like the summers off or something, and mentioned that she had, because of listening to Speech in the Silence and Thelema Now, determined to move during her off season to somewhere where there was a local body and get to know OTO. And so she had moved to Sacramento because of the podcasts.
Right.
So that's a very direct, like, here's somebody that had and now she's going to go back to Saskatchewan and start a study group. So,
and that's interesting too, because no one's really said this, but I imagined that people would say, so if everything's like on a podcast, then like why have bodies and why go places and stuff like that? But it's just like we're supposed to have paperless offices, and now there's more paper because of email. There's more reason, because of the technology. It actually makes someone who sees that lack, that the dearth of people to communicate with in the flesh. Now they're inspired to go seek it out because you're reaching out to them. There's something out there now, if they're really feeling that isolated. So it's just interesting to hear you say that. It's like, that's a perfect example of that.
yeah.
Well, it's funny, I was just thinking about this, like, how long have we really had this type of technology? I mean, I'm going to be close to 20 years being part of the OTO, and I know people that it took them months to have a letter that they sent to someone to be able to, locate a local body.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that was.
now with this particular technology, I mean, you can actually, find one if it's not in your community. It could be just like this young woman decided to move to an area, and I think that we're going to see bigger numbers as far as people wanting to join, and I don't think it's, if anything, like you're saying, oh, well, why bother to go to a body's if I can just listen to it. I don't think so. I think it's going to make people even that much more interested, and they want to be part of that community.
Right.
They can listen to it, but there's nothing like being.
Yeah, it's just going to make you want to be part of it more.
Yeah, if anything, it enhances it and makes it. There's nothing like being alive in a room with like minds that are feeding off each other.
Yeah.
And it's just like now. I mean, as far as discussing it, it's exciting.
Yeah.
I think also that by having these podcasts, that it puts a real face or voice to Thelema, that we're not a bunch of screwballs. I mean, I remember when he and I joined the Order 12 years ago, we were going to meet the camp master, and we were like making jokes like, oh, I guess we should just look for the guy who looks like Marilyn Manson. that we had no idea who we were going to meet and what they were going to be like. And I think by hearing conversation, humor, intelligence, thoughts, academia, that it really helps make it much more approachable for people to then seek out other Thelemites to interact with.
And it also works the opposite way, because it should make us less attractive to people looking for the wackos. You know what I mean? Because, that podcast is boring. They're not talking about any of these fill in the blank of what wacko topics they might be looking for. We're not giving that,
I've never heard tinfoil hats mentioned on that show. Forget those guys.
They won't let me do it.
Every time you say it, I come to
Yeah, that's it. Tinfoil hat.
Right. Yeah, and I think also, just in terms of the question of, if people are wondering, like, okay, if you can hear these classes or lectures on a podcast, why even have local bodies? Well, I think that the thing is that when you have, say, a lecture on a podcast that's a basic talk about whatever particular concept, and that gets spread around, well, that means that the next class you can have can go to the next level with that thing. If everybody's kind of starting from a more advanced base, then you can push it further and advance ideas that way. Yeah, that's another thing. There's been some question about, like, oh, well, if I put my talk on your podcast, well, then nobody's going to show up if I go travel somewhere and do it. But it's totally not the case. In fact, people hear it on the podcast and they go, ooh, I'd really like to hear that in person. And then they go and they can actually interact with the person rather than just hearing it. And I think, too, when people hear something on a podcast, they kind of hear it, maybe they're doing dishes or whatever, and they only pick up bits and pieces, and they either then go back and listen to it again, or they ask their local body to do something similar and have discussions on the same topics or whatever.
Record albums haven't replaced concerts.
Exactly.
Good point. Yeah, record albums have not replaced concerts.
It's a perfect metaphor.
Mm-hmm. So getting started with your own podcast, as you've heard, neither of us have had any experience previously with podcasting. Amy and Howard, have you guys had prior experience with you've had recording experience, right? Or
Where I work, we did a business talk radio show, so I had produced that. And,
got it.
So I actually use the production equipment where I work to do the.
Got it.
So we have like a professional mixing board and everything, and the
Nice.
software.
But that doesn't mean that you can't do it without that. It's just
Right.
we just got a great opportunity with that. So.
Yeah, in fact, we use computer microphones, and that's I guess we have this recorder. This is the most fancy equipment we have sitting right in front of you right now. That is I actually really recommend it if you're thinking about doing a podcast to get something like this or even this model. They're sort of high-end pocket recorders. This one's made by Zoom, but you can go look at reviews for various other ones. It has stereo microphones in it and stuff, and it records right to MP3 or WAV format. Really handy for especially live presentations, and it's directional, so you can focus it on who's talking.
And I've used a similar thing, so I can vouch
Yeah,
for that
yeah.
being very true and easy to use
Yeah.
and great, amazing quality considering the price point and all that stuff.
Yeah, they run $150 to $200
Yeah, I
basically, but if you don't want to get one of these, you can always just get a USB microphone on your computer too.
True.
And also, I think Skype you use Skype for your phone interviews.
We haven't used Skype.
Oh no, really?
No.
What do you guys use for
I've been
that?
told that the quality is not good enough.
Yeah.
No,
But that doesn't mean you can't do a
insist-
podcast like that.
I insist on a landline.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that it's recorded directly onto the thing from the landline. There's a black box you can get from Radio Shack of all places.
Yep.
That has a jack, you plug it into the recorder. It has like
Into the phone.
an interface that goes between the wall jack.
Incredibly simple. I've used that too.
And the sound quality is excellent for that.
Yep.
And those, I imagine, at Radio Shack probably run $10 or something, right?
It might be
It's like
12.
a piece of plastic.
It might be
basically.
12.
Yeah.
And it's a proprietary thing to Radio Shack.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And it works
device.
perfectly,
It
yeah.
works perfect.
Nice. So it's very easy to get into podcasting. You can use a lot of different approaches and different technologies. As far as editing, oh yes, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was jumping in.
Oh, I was going to say, just as far as like editing the podcast, like once you have audio and then getting it into editing format, I mean, you can, if you want to and have the resources to go get a professional, editing suite like Pro Tools or whatever, go ahead with that. But also there's Audacity, which is a free,
Amazingly good for free. It's
yeah, and
amazing.
you can get all the documentations online. You can get little tutorials on YouTube and such. And
There's also another free one called WavePad, which is also very easy to use to edit. Allows you to paste things in, mix in music, that type of thing. Very simple.
it's called WavePad.
WavePad.
It's another free download. And is that for IBM or Mac?
I believe you can definitely do PC.
PC.
I probably Mac as well.
Right. John?
Yes, for Mac users, GarageBand is
Oh, sure.
basically a recording and mixing studio on your computer. It's part of the iLife suite, and it's bundled in free with the OS.
Right.
Nice.
So
That's
and
true.
I haven't played around with it as a podcast, but I have played around with just making music out of the pre-recorded loops they give you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different approaches you can take, and if anybody ever does want to take the leap and start doing a podcast, I'm sure Pete and Amy and Howard and I would all be happy to answer any questions you have or provide some input on what to do. For me, it's been very much a sink or swim kind of live and learn situation where we made a few podcasts and I was like, oh, compression, like this is a whole concept, and like, oh yeah, volume levels, huh? But like I said, as soon as I figured out like what it was that I needed to do, it was just a matter of going on Google, and there's lots of tutorials and stuff like that about those topics. So other media that are right for. Yeah, I think YouTube is certainly at the top of my list of things that are. It seems like there's a lot of room for expansion into the YouTube world, and we actually in the Speech and the Silence we started putting together YouTube clips. They're it's organized a little bit differently than the podcast originally. So instead of having one YouTube that's the entire show, we have YouTubes for each kind of segment,
Right.
which then, and those, I mean, that's like a whole other world, because it's like there's people who listen to stuff on YouTube that never download
A
podcast. And those also can get spread around a little bit more easily.
I found people actually doing that for Thelema Now already. Like, we didn't do
Oh,
it,
yeah.
but see, it kind of spreads that way, where someone has, because we're giving it out for free, we, you know, it would be nice if they don't edit it in some messed up way, which no one apparently has. They put the podcast up and on a YouTube video, and then more people are getting to the podcast by finding out, oh, is there more stuff like this? So, I mean, that's something to exploit. Streaming, you know, I think video streaming, or just audio streaming, any kind of streaming would be interesting. I would have loved to try to figure out to do something here, but I wouldn't, you know, I haven't done the homework to figure out what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I did a little furtive little experiments. It works, you know. But what exactly you'd use that for, I'm not even sure, but might as well explore it and find out.
That's a great idea. Actually, I've been thinking about streaming for a while in relation to holding lectures, because I mean, it's certainly cheaper than flying someone somewhere to do a talk. And I mean, the key piece is like having some way of interaction with the people who are watching. But I guess there's
That would be Skype.
Skype.
That is
That's
Skype,
be
yeah.
Skype.
Audio only.
Audio only. Is that what you said? Yeah, I think
But
that
you
there's
could do
also
both at the same time then, perhaps. Have the video streaming and then have Skype at the same time for the
Right.
interaction.
Right, and I think that also I've seen some other people using a thing called Stickcam,
Okay,
which is like you get video one way, and then they can type messages to you coming back the other way.
Right.
That would be a possibility. So that could be something where you could have classes that are interactive and kind of spread worldwide and live. You say something?
This may be just for people that have other resources at the office and stuff, but we do conferences online all the time now. It's become
video
like half of
conferencing.
our people are here and half
Oh,
of our
sure.
people are elsewhere. And that works really, really nicely, and we get a podcast out of it at the end.
Oh yeah,
They
nice.
do all the work for us.
Right. Nice.
That's good.
I don't think it's really, really expensive.
Right.
Right.
Jed, did you have something? You had your
I was going to say blogs.
blogs, right? Yep.
I guess blogs are usually more oriented towards people that are already interested in Thelema.
Mhm.
Like I know, yeah, 131 and
Mhm.
Meeting
Mhm.
edition. There's the, what's it called, the Thelemic blog review or whatever.
Right.
They amalgamate every single Thelemic blog.
Right.
Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
But you could definitely turn that toward promulgation if you start tagging it under more general things like philosophy,
Sure.
Mhm.
history, or anthropology. Then you can definitely get it spread that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Dathan occasionally has blog posts, and Dionysus
Sure.
sometimes, and there's AC 2012, and ER 131. Sabazius now has a blog. So yeah, that's a good point. That's another area that can be expanded, and I think that it kind of for a while there was kind of stuck in the LiveJournal ghetto. The whole blogging thing, and then like I think after it kind of escaped there, I think it kind of went through a short dead period of there was no blogging, and now it seems to be picking back up, and people are getting their own blogs on their own platforms.
People found Twitter where they could just dump their crap.
Yeah, right.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, yeah. Howard.
It feels like we're getting into sort of like an open forum here to a degree, so.
Sure.
I would just like to add another thought to this whole process. So, you know, we're talking about, creating these resources, podcasts or, streams and stuff like that. The next important step, of course, is to promote it. It's great to have it, and, when Thelema Now was developed, it was under the premise that it was going to live on the Grand Lodge site, which on one hand, it's meant to attract traffic to Grand Lodge.
To the site, yeah.
But the other thing is clearly it's also it's good placement. You go to the home page and it says podcast. It's like right there. It's like, oh, what the hell is that? And that's great. But at the same time, that would just if that's all that was used, that would still be kind of passive.
Very.
So I think that, once you create something like these podcasts, it's important to start looking at, how do you start letting people know they're out there? For instance, every time there's a new Thelema Now, I'm basically putting out the link to, all the leadership groups I belong to, and saying, here it is, please look at it, please give it to your members, and please ask your members to give it to any non-initiates that they think might enjoy this.
Right.
It's not like, who you think would suck it, it's like, who would enjoy this?
Yeah.
If
Yes,
you
it
have
is.
something with like a Genesis Peorage, where it's not just Thelemites that are interested, like anyone who likes goth or, industrial, et cetera, it's those people then can, be sent those things. Or, there's a couple of Facebook accounts that I tap into. Same thing, those links go out to, all those things.
And over half of our downloads are done on iTunes. So it's important that if you're going to have something like that, it's free. And you can just get into iTunes, put in the keywords that people might search for, Crowley, Thelema.
Yeah, I can't believe we didn't mention iTunes, because I know we both can say how important that is.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to start a podcast, you're going to get it on iTunes.
Yeah.
That's people.
And that's over half of our people.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, promotion's really important, especially through the social networks, I think.
I think it's obvious we both do that a lot.
Yeah.
And there's probably other avenues as
Sure.
well. I mean, I just
We need to find other
those
avenues.
are
There's gotta
some
be other
examples.
avenues.
And I'm sure that if you thought about it, you'd think of even better things, and hopefully when you do, you'll email us and say like, hey, you never thought of this. What about this one?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think another kind of technology that's up and coming, that's an area that can be potentially explored further, is self-publishing. With like things like Lulu and so forth, we're going to see more of that happening. I mean, even this book, I mean, we ended up buying a whole lot of them, but we didn't go to a traditional publishing house for these. The proceedings books, these went to a self-publishing house. We ended up, they're good quality. They're just the same quality as what you'd find in a traditional publishing house, but it means that the outset costs are lower. You don't have to warehouse them and pay for storage for months and months. You make them as you need them. And that's, I think, a venue that can be explored further, because traditional publishing houses are finding, I think, that they don't want to put in a lot of money for publications that have a limited audience. And so, if you have Thelemic content that you want to put out there, that maybe every single Thelemite in the world wants to get it, but that's still not enough for a publishing house.
Right.
So I think that's another area.
Definitely.
And to that end, you can also put stuff up on Amazon in electronic format. Only someone with a Kindle can download it, but you can sell it for 99 cents, and you can sell a lot.
Sure.
Yeah.
And didn't Ron Duquette do his fictional book, the Aleister Crowley Members of the Magicians?
I think that's true, yeah.
He did it through Amazon self-publishing. It's like Lulu, but it's through Amazon.
And I don't know the details, but Rodney Orpheus's new book, Grimoire of Aleister Crowley, is he's self-publishing it. Because when you looked at the deals, I mean, obviously there's only certain publishers that specialize in this stuff, and when you're doing like a high-end collectible antiquarian type book, which I think some of us love, there's a big enough margin in those type of books for that small market. But there's really only a couple of publishers that'll do a book like that on these topics. And I know Rodney was saying, when I look at what they're going to give us for selling these, why don't I just do it myself?
I would say also that there's always new social networks. I think that now the newest one is Google+, which I have not even ventured onto yet. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly. It seems like it's a little bit different in the way that how it could be used to spread information about Thelema, because it's more like people under their real names, and you have to already know them, and you can't just like have a community that people can randomly glom onto. So I'm not sure exactly how.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I started playing with it, but it does seem like it's more like these are already people you know. So you're really just sharing your stuff with your family or friends or your circle.
I think a lot of people, as soon as Google Plus came out, what you do, you made it the one circle.
Yeah. And yeah,
And so that doesn't really help with promulgation.
at all, yeah.
Right.
Closed circuit.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess it helps Thelemites get more connected with each other,
Sure.
but it doesn't help new people who might not know any Thelemites find that circle.
Yeah, because that circle's invisible to everyone who's not.
Right,
Right,
exactly.
exactly.
So it's different technologies, but I think that they're always going to be changing, and they'll probably find some way to
To have
incorporate
like a
that
group
kind
that
of.
people can join.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I was going to mention Kickstarter is a new
Oh, yeah.
technology that I think can be utilized very effectively by Thelemites. We're always creating stuff and looking for ways to fund our projects, and I think that Kickstarter is a really good one, a way of doing that. Anybody not familiar with Kickstarter? So Kickstarter is basically you go on there and you can create your project and explain what it is. You can have like a little video introduction or whatever, and then you say how much money you're trying to raise to make this project happen. And people make pledges, and you can offer little gifts for different levels of pledging.
And there's a deadline and everything.
And there's
so-
a deadline, so if the money isn't raised by the deadline, none of the pledgers have to pay anything. But then if you reach or exceed the target amount, then everybody kicks in their amount that they pledged. So it's a really effective way of I think, raising funds. The Elusive production company is currently using it. I've seen a couple other Thelemic projects recently come up on there, and it's a great way, I think, to kind of get funding happening when you may not have any other way of doing it. Well, thank you all for coming very
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Thanks for.
It was pretty painless.
Yeah, it was easy.